It's a great honor for me to introduce our annual lecture in memory of Commander David T. Leighton, late stalwart, assistant, and invaluable supporter to Admiral Hyman Rickover at Naval Reactors, both when he was in uniform and later for many years as a civilian. He also had a real passion for naval history and spent a lot of time and a significant investment in supporting particularly the submarine exhibit in the Cold War gallery. But we're honored to have this particular lecture in his name. I will make a comment that at the end, first of all, you're going to see Captain retired Dan Pedersen present the actual lecture. And then following that, we have the great honor and distinction of having two former Top Gun graduates, retired Vice Admirals Ted Slapshot Carter, a member of our board, and Tom Kilcline, who are going to entertain any questions and expound upon any loose ends after Captain Pedersen finishes his lecture. So I'd like to introduce this event. First of all, it's going to be Captain retired Dan Pedersen talking about his book that came out a couple of years ago entitled Top Gun, An American Story. It was actually published in 2019, the 50th anniversary of the beginning of what's become known as Top Gun out at Naval Air Station Miramar back in the old days. So it might be worthwhile to put this in a little perspective. And so this began some 5 years into the war in Vietnam. During that war, the air-to-air engagements between the Navy, Marine Corps, and the Air Force against the air vehicles, mostly MiG-21s in later years from the Vietnamese Air Force, certainly strongly aided and abetted by Russians, Chinese, and the North Koreans, in many cases actually flying in these airplanes. But over the course of the war, the so-called kill ratio, the number of aircraft that were shot down by our side and their side, had ended up coming down to almost 1 for 1, which in our view was absolutely unsustainable, both in terms of human loss of our people being shot down and or killed, and the number of aircraft, pretty expensive, mostly F-4 Phantoms later on in our side. And so things had to change. And the leadership of the Navy commissioned then Captain Frank Alt, who was an experienced combat aviator from several wars, including Vietnam, and just given command of the USS Carl C. aircraft carrier. And Frank set to work with a team to try to sort out, at the direction of CNO, what the heck was going on and how we could improve it. Keep in mind a couple of things now. One, the Navy had transitioned to the F-4 as the principal fighter aircraft. The F-4 didn't have a gun, unlike its predecessor, the F-8 and other fighter aircraft that preceded it. The other thing is the introduction of air-to-air missiles, particularly the AIM-9 Sidewinder and the AIM-7 Sparrow, kind of set the scene for an ability to actually engage in combat at arm's length, that is, beyond visual range. However, the rules of engagement that were instituted primarily by folks back in political seats in Washington, two key points. One, there'd be no beyond visual range. You had to do a visual ID before, and that meant you had to close right up, go nose to nose with the enemy aircraft. Second thing is, given the incredible rules of engagement at the time, very often these bases from which the MiGs flew, the MiG-UN, MiG-21 primarily, right underneath our people, were absolutely off limits, so we couldn't attack them. And so the MiGs had a sanctuary. If they ran low on fuel, they just landed. So what's to happen? So Frank Alt set to work and came up with a number of recommendations, some of them technical and some of them along the tactical training line. And this was handed off to the West Coast Fighter Replacement Squadron, Fighter Squadron 121 at Miramar at the time. And there's a fellow by the name of Dan Pedersen, lieutenant commander, who was in the tactics branch at that time. And he was asked to head up a team, put together a team, and come up with a way to consider how we trained our fighter crews to do better and to turn this one-to-one kill ratio around. So Dan Pedersen had come in the Navy back in the early 50s as an enlisted sailor. He went to flight training, became an aviator, deployed to fighter squadrons through Vietnam a couple of times. Now he's back in, as we call it, the RAG at Miramar, doing the tactics thing. He later, after this, went on to bigger and better things, commander of a fighter squadron, and then commander of an air wing, and a deep draft, the USS Wichita, and then the aircraft carrier Ranger in an illustrious career. He's now retired. He's still with us. You're going to see him in a minute. And with that, I think I'd like to transition to the video. Captain Dan Pedersen, United States Navy retired, after which we'll have live Q&A with Killer and Slapshot. Please.
Hello there, and thank you. I dedicate my remarks today on behalf of the 18 million veterans and Top Guns Brotherhood of 50 years that have served our America. Some are veterans, some are still serving today. All are great Americans. The invitation to speak was a wonderful acknowledgement of Top Gun's legacy and its 50-year history as told in my book, Top Gun: An American Story. I hope each of you enjoy reading it, and it was dedicated to our Navy and to some great Navy people. Today, I'd like to start out and say Top Gun is 52 years old. What do we know in today's modern government that has lasted 52 years? It's amazing. I'd like to honor in this presentation and tell you about 42 superb skippers or leaders and about 565 instructors that brought the graduate school to this half-century anniversary while earning an international reputation as the world's foremost authority on tactical aviation. Over the years, we have come to refer to each other as bros or brothers. I call the original 10, which were 9 that were with me in its beginning, as the original bros. And we still have a great reverence to that name. 6 are still alive today, some 52 years later. And the rest are all young, vital, dynamo naval aviators and NFOs who are alive and well flying jets in Fallon, Nevada. Remember, in the beginning, when we discovered that we were going to do the graduate school, it struck me that we had never been asked to do anything this important in our lives, any of us. The death rate, 2-to-1 kill ratio out in Vietnam, which had been going on for about 5 years. I had been out there twice, and I came back with a lot of opinions, and it's a tough business. You deal in human life every single day, not only then, but now. The boys today are probably better than we were, for certain. Certainly their tasking is more difficult than what we did. It's demanding. Teaching a graduate education. Think about it. I'm going to tell you in a few minutes how we did it and how much time we were given, assets, if any, that we were given, and the demands that were put upon us. And I'm curious to see what your reaction is to those facts. It's hard, it's demanding, particularly to take something where Naval Aviation has been fighting a war for 5 years, and somebody says, I want to get well program, I want it in 60 days, develop a graduate school. And that was a tasking. The guidance was, don't lose any airplanes and don't kill anybody. Even today, some 50 years later, they're constantly dealing with change. New aircraft, new weapons, tactics, both theirs and potential enemies. Maybe two big potential countries, which could be our enemies. They are the central repository of valid tactical information for the U.S. Navy. Moreover, they are still run and operated by young naval aviators. Now my book. The book was written early in 2018 in response to a telephone call from Jim Hornfisher. I'd like to take this moment and acknowledge Jim's guidance in the beginning. He and Daryl Gary, which I chose as one of the original bros, call sign Condor, asked me because I happened to be the senior. I was a senior one in the operation as it began. They called me and said, we're almost approaching 50 years in duration. How about you being the senior guy? How about writing a book and tell the country and put our legacy in writing once and for all? A lot of speculation about how it began and so forth. So I agreed to do that with the help of the original bros. It was a remarkable experience to relive 29 years and then some of my service life during the research. I used my logbooks, cruise books, some 5,000 pictures, and other sort of memorabilia and help from other former shipmates. There wasn't quite enough time available nor information readily at hand to write in detail about all 50 years. So the book also includes a portion of my memoirs and my career as a naval aviator and officer. The book speaks for itself, but I must emphasize again that Top Gun was started by all young naval officers, the youngest being 21 years old, and I was 31 years old. We were all about 5 years into the Vietnam War. One of the criteria for the selection of the original group was that we have combat experience. You'll be amazed how much combat experience young people can have at this particular time. Something was really wrong out there in that war. Something to change the kill ratio from 2 to 1 to the more realistic historic naval aviation kill ratio in all aviation encounters at 12 to 1. And that's what it had been. And it had to be fixed. They obviously wanted it done in very short order. Too many fine American airmen were dying. poor tactics and weapons performance, and the war was being controlled and dictated from Washington. I know that'll offend some of you, but it's true. I was out there, so were the rest of the original pros. We had been there at least twice in 5 years. And that war was run by LBJ and Robert McNamara. Now, you may not agree with that, but have you ever read the book on gradualism? That's what they did. We simply were not allowed to win that war. We had brilliant four-star leadership in USG Sharp at St. Pac Fleet and many others who are quite capable of taking down the North Vietnamese Air Force. And we weren't allowed to do it. However, Top Gun was precipitated by a report written by Captain Frank Ault. Frank Ault was skipper of the carrier Coral Sea during the current time out there on the line in Yankee Station. And the Ault report was about, was a consortium of several really talented, experienced naval aviators, but it provided an assessment on the overall war. It was unsolicited, made it all the way to CNO in a hurry. And in dealing with fighter aviation, it made two recommendations: that we start a graduate school immediately, a get well program at Miramar, and that we work on the weapons system failures that we were experiencing and redefine the firing envelopes for Sparrow and Sidewinder. The third thing, and the primary purpose of the Fighter Weapons School in the beginning, was to relearn dogfighting. We call it now air combat maneuvering. But to take the existing airplanes, the F-4, and in the middle of a war, we didn't have the leisure of waiting for new, better designed airplanes. The F-4 was quite capable, but it was defined by the manufacturer to be flown a certain way. And what Top Gun did successfully in about 60 days was expand the flying envelope of that airplane. We did things with the airplane that made McDonnell Douglas cringe, but we did it consistently. It worked. We very rapidly redefined the tactics. And as I said, you got 60 days to do it in. We really don't have much in the way of support to give you other than we'll loan you airplanes when you need them to do your evaluation. And don't lose any aircraft and don't kill anybody. And I worked for VF-121, the Mother Rag Replacement Air Group at Miramar. And that's how it was formed, as an adjunct to them. And as I said, I had just come back from my second cruise, and I was head of the combat phase of training. And so that was a source that I had. I had about 15 guys teaching tactics, basic tactics, not advanced tactics like I'm talking about here. Ultimately, we arrived at quite advanced tactics. But I picked, and I don't know how this happened, but it just happened that out of the 15 or so that were available that I knew well, I picked them for specific aviation or combat experience, for their technical knowledge and background. And I didn't have much time to do a lot of checking. It was gut feeling of how good these guys were and how willing they were to work. I chose Lieutenant Mel Holmes, call sign Rattler, is a brilliant aerodynamicist. Not the greed in it, but very good. John Nash, call sign Smash. A lot of F4 time, brilliant in tactics, and had just come from Air Force Exchange at Nellis and was a pro in air to ground. Jim Rulison, Cobra Rulison, missile performance firing envelopes. He brought more mental ability on the technical side for the radar and the fire control system and both missiles. And he handled that almost single-handedly for the first 60 days. Jerry Sawatzki, a great big Polish guy, played football for Bear Bryant, and just a superb aviator and an easygoing guy who we gave the adversary program right after the first 60 days. Jerry ran the adversary program for me. 4 pilots, you just heard them. Then we have to select NFOs, or the backseaters as we call them. My first choice was J.C. Smith. J.C., former naval aviator, was probably the best RO or backseater I ever flew with. And he had the first MiG of the Vietnam War. He shot it down with Lou Page as his pilot. A very fine teacher. Lieutenant Steve Smith, Rebel. He probably should have been a convicted felon, and I'll tell you why in a few minutes. He's a superb RO, the kind of guy you could give a list of things at 8 in the morning to do, and by 4 o'clock in the 1600, he'd have them all done. Jimmy Lang, the famous Hawkeye, been on air, had more time on the ground in North Vietnam than any of us. He had been shot down twice, but he also got a couple MiGs. And easygoing, quiet. He was my litmus test if we were going in the right direction. Daryl Gary, backseater, initially went on to flight training again, had 4 tours at Top Gun over the 50 years before he got out. And great tactician. I know no better pilot than Condor was. Wayne Hildebrand was the last one, and he was our spook, intelligence specialist. We got him from an F-8 squadron, and he started the archives of which exists today. Fallon has probably the best repository of tactical information in the world, current. Each individual, and I had been doing some flying with the Israelis. And one of the things, the only thing I really took away from them, honestly, was when you're on a short schedule, time-wise, break up the segments. So I found the things that I thought needed to be fixed. I gave them to each of the guys, and I said, this is your area of expertise. I want you to learn everything, do all the research, and at the end of our 60 days, or near the end of 60 days, we will take and we will come together, and you're going to get the murder board, your presentations. I want you to have formalized what you've learned and how we would put it into a tactics manual that'll go back out to the fleet with the fleet pilots who we're going to train, so that we can expand our knowledge as rapidly as possible to the ongoing war. And that's how it was done. We murder boarded, and the murder boards were merciless. I mean, everything from shoe shine to various polish, spit and polish, if you will, of how well your curriculum and work was designed and so forth. And it worked. I was amazed at how talented these young guys were, how much they knew, how opinionated they were having come from combat. I might mention right now, we all knew we were going back out. I was only 31 years old. I was going back out, probably as a department head, for my third combat cruise. Incidentally, I made 2 more before it was over. And the last 2 were better than the first 2 because we were winning. Okay. First of all, that same group of guys, we didn't have a building, had no furniture, had no desks, no telephones, no safes. Got to have safes, right? Navy guys know you got to have safes. Keep your classified material in. We had no laptops in those days, no cell phones, no word processors, only a typewriter and a Xerox copy machine. And we went through several of those very rapidly. Once the documents were formatted, the government printing office, they helped us a lot. No consultants, and I want to underline that. There were no consultants and no subcontracts, no outside studies, all USN, young minds and experience. And I might add, we pirated a few chiefs from the mother squadron, and the knowledge that chiefs gave us was just wonderful. Every day, 7 days a week, for 2 months we worked. We'd start at 4 in the morning and usually quit flying at dark and retire to the O Club. Have 1 or 2 beers at 8 o'clock, and each guy would present what he had going on that day and any new innovations he came up with. I won't go into the tactics. The tactics simply for all of you that are in the historical organization went back and compared how we fought Second World War. I had been with Gino Valencia and 4 aces in my first fighter squadron, and I sucked them up, the knowledge from them like a sponge. So I knew the Second World War tactics for several airplanes. I had been an enlisted guy in F4U Corsair Squadron props. So I got some good exposure there, and then we researched Korea, and we looked at the tactics in Korea and our tactics that we're using. And we simply took the F4, which had marvelous engines and great piece of S, or specific power, and we flew it up and down. If you flew it in a horizontal against the enemy, most of the time you're going so fast you'd lose sight. We had a saying, lose sight, lose the fight. Can't do that. So we developed a loose-deuce tactics, which is a derivative of Admiral Thatch Weave, and we called it a mile and a half abeam each other, and we called that. From that, we engaged fighter and free fighter and engaged fighter tactics, and then we fly into the vertical. The free fighter went up over the fight and flew up there, up high above the fight to keep it in sight. And when it was opportune, if the engaged fighter hadn't gotten the shot, the free fighter would come back down and engage. In 60 days, we came up with a 6-week course, 8 students, 26 flights, and we flew as adversaries in borrowed A4s most of the time. If we ran into problems with the students, we would either put a backseater with one of the pilots, or in my case, we'd take over one, either front or back seat, what we do with the students, and it worked really good. The tactics, it didn't take long. We had some guys that really knew their stuff. Mel Holmes, probably the best F-4 pilot I knew of in the world during that period of time. He was a natural with the airplane. And we went up to Area 51 and talk about it now. And it was very classified at one time. But we went up to Area 51, Mel and we flew the MiGs. I got 8 flights in, and we validated the tactics for the graduation present for the first group of students, Class 1. Without telling them, we briefed them at Miramar, sent them like they were going to North Vietnam, only they were going to Area 51. And Mel and I met them in MiGs when we were up there. So we see how good they absorbed our vertical tactics, which we'd been advocating. And by golly, they did really good. Again, without being long-winded here, we went from 2-to-1 kill ratio. And then you take from the day the Top Gun graduated their first class to the end of the war in 1973, the kill ratio, Navy kill ratio, jumped to 24-to-1. 24-to-1 in that short time. And I think it's 60 or 65% of the kills in that entire war were done by Top Gun graduates. And we all went back a couple more times. And that more than satisfied the average of American naval aviators in history. The book has been very successful. Most people really enjoy it. I keep very busy writing answers to letters. One of the things you might want to do when you read the book is look at the foreword. Condor, Daryl Gary wrote the foreword. This guy's a really smart young man. He was. He's a smarter old man now. But he and I we tried to figure out, took us about 3 years later in life to figure out what were the elements or the factors that made it so successful that still exist today. And they are delineated in the foreword to the book. Take a look at them. I have 3 major corporations in the U.S. came to me and said, "We've read your book, we read the foreword, we want you to come and lecture on the elements of success," which we did. They bought books for all their executives, and we ended up with a lot of friendships out of it. Some really smart people are doing things the Navy way, if you will. So, and I've spoken over the years for many, many veterans groups. I went up to Charleston to the Yorktown Museum and had a wonderful time with their staff and Admiral Jimmy Flatley, who's been a long friend, probably a great, well-known aviator to all of you there. And Jim has always been a big help to me. Went to Alameda, spoke to all the docents of the Hornet Museum in Alameda, California. And then Daryl and I and the boys still go down to the Midway in San Diego frequently. And we had a reunion in San Diego for the 50th anniversary. And we had about 500 plus former instructors and COs attend. It's probably the most fun. I've had some good tail hooks, but the Top Gun's 50th reunion was a remarkable time. Anyhow, God bless each of you. God bless our veterans, our Navy, the fleet that's out there today, the guys that are doing double duty out in the Persian Gulf right now, and most of our country. I hope this long-winded guy satisfied the male. Have faith. God bless you. Amen.
Good afternoon and welcome to the discussion portion of our annual meeting. And Captain Pedersen was phenomenal. I want to close a couple of loose ends about that. But as Admiral Fallon already mentioned, our panelists are tremendous resources in understanding the efficacy of Top Gun and its place not just in our future. The 2 points that I wanted to jump on board with Captain Pedersen were, first, did you see the photograph of then Lieutenant Jim Lang ejecting from his F-4? And this would be the second time he'd ejected in a little over a month. What a photograph. And this photo was taken by the pilot who had also ejected. Phenomenal. The second point is about Lieutenant Steve Smith, and he said he should be a convicted felon. I read his book. I downloaded to my Kindle Captain Pedersen's book, and it was a really quick read, but an elegant read. But apparently Lieutenant Steve Smith was kind of the Comshock king of the world. And so this detachment shows up. They got nothing. They don't have blackboards. They don't have safes. They don't even have a place to meet. So he finds some trailer, 10x40 trailer, gets some guys, gives them coffee or whatever, has some crane operators move this thing over in the shade, and basically finds some air conditioning and really just sets up shop for the whole command, the detachment. So anyway, that's the part that Captain Pedersen that time didn't permit him to cover. But in any event, you didn't come here to see me. I want to ask the first question to our very elegant panel. Thank you to Flax Fallon for his introduction of them. But my first question to both panelists, and we'll start with Slapshot, is do you have any comments yourselves on Captain Pedersen's keynote remarks about the early days of Top Gun? Slapshot.
Well, I'll first just start by saying thank you for allowing me to be here today. What a great opportunity. And, from my perspective, to listen to Captain Pedersen, the word that jumps out at me is innovation. I mean, we talk about it a lot, but they did it, and they did it with nothing. And I was a product of that. I went through the last F-4 Top Gun class in 1985. I was actually the last active duty aviator. I'm a radar intercept officer by trade. I was the last one on active duty, and I started out my career on the Midway. And the course program that he described was exactly the program I went through in 1985. And it's remarkable how good it had become. And I know we'll have a chance to talk a little bit more about that, but I was so privileged. And to be quite frank, I stayed in the Navy because I went to Top Gun. So I'm just so thankful that we had the talent and the foresight and the vision of men like Captain Pedersen.
Killer.
Yeah, I was going to start with a little bit of a preamble. I had the great privilege of flying for the Navy from 1973 to 2010. And my last flight was in a F-5 adversary aircraft in support of the Top Gun class, one of my last flights in 2010. So I spent a lot of time in and out of Top Gun. I consider myself a Top Gun consumer and a fan. And I'm proud to be a patch wearer, as Slapshot just got through saying. When I finished, just a little back, when I finished my flight training, my F-8 CO made sure I got orders to fighters. I didn't admit to him at the time, but I cheated a little bit by putting my flaps down, and I was able to get a gunshot. And he was impressed enough to get me out to fighters. First day at Miramar, I met Duke Cunningham. Those of you who know him would recognize this. I met him at the gym, and we became basketball players and played a lot together. Next thing is I checked into 121 a couple of days later, and the first thing I was shown was the Top Gun trailer, which was still back out in the parking lot. My initial impression was this is where I wanted to be. Instructors led by Yank Dorsey, who was a CO, were all combat experienced. And those are the guys I learned how to fly the F-4. My first fleet squadron was 51. The reason I'm telling you this is that I was assigned to a section where the flight lead hugged and shot down a MiG. My backseater, one of the best I've ever flown with, Booger, had just left Top Gun. Condor was one of the original brothers, was in my squadron. And Commander Dan Pedersen, the real John Wayne, was my CAG. And I have to put these Ray-Bans on because this is what I would see him whenever I was hacking around at Miramar. He'd be wearing these things. So my CAG, 46 years ago. And this was how I began fighter aviation. Top Gun was key to that progression as a fighter pilot, how I approached flying, how I approached fighting, and how I approached winning. Guys like Hawk, Turtle, Black, Pappy, Thunder, Huck, Rooster, and all the other instructors during my class in 1977 demonstrated a ruthless devotion to quality, both on the ground and in the air. Something that still defines Top Gun today. My backseater, Bill Eggs Benedict, was my roommate, my crew member for 2 years, and my Top Gun compatriot. And I'll talk a little bit about that more later on. We talk about the crewing issues associated with pilots and NFOs. He's currently a 3-star. Actually wears 3 stars as a sheriff of Squim County on the Olympia Peninsula. I resonated with something that I saw in a video in preparation for this. Lieutenant Ryan Sid Kelly, a current Top Gun instructor, said it well when he said Top Gun is not in the business of good enough. So hopefully that answers your question. My takeaway from that book, and I've got it sitting right here, I was able to read it, was that when Condor wrote down the things that made a Top Gun instructor, and I'm going to read those: passion for excellence, leading by example, airmanship, being the SME, work ethic, desire to endure, integrity, innovation, and challenging the status quo, and credibility through performance. Those all resonated. And they built a professionalism on uncompromising peer review. The thing that got me, and the thing that I was impressed mostly by, and you could see it in the book, was the leaders. And that was the CEOs of Top Gun. And I don't think we talk enough about how those men were the ones that allowed the Top Gun instructors, those people with those qualities we just talked about, to succeed. How do you gather? How do you motivate the best type A fighter pilots in a ruthless quest for excellence? I believe from reading the book, Capt. Pedersen was truly at that time a 31-year-old lieutenant commander who was their leader. Wrote down a few things that I saw him do. He analyzed the issue, built a plan to accomplish it. He assembled the best team. He aligned the roles and linked them to missions. Created a condition to reach the max potential of his individuals and his team. He provided the resources they needed. And lastly, he guided the team. I think if you were to go back and read a lot of instructions on leadership, pure leadership, you'll see a lot of those things, and I saw them all there. The main thing I want to make sure everybody understands when they think about Top Gun, it's about leading from the front, by example on the air and the ground. It's about setting standards. It's about communicating those standards. It's about balancing performance and perfection with experimentation and innovation, which is going to result in mistakes that are made in honest ways. Then lastly, it's built through integrity, through caring, and mostly through top cover for the folks who work for you. You need to listen and act. That was a bit of a long piece of it, but that's what I got out of the book, and it's what I've gotten through my years of flying and fighting. Back over to you, Sid.
Thank you very much. A question for both of you. How did the training for pilots differ from training for radar intercept officers in Top Gun, or did it? Was it the same, or was it blended? Was it different?
Well, I'll go first here. I will tell you my experience at Top Gun, and this was similar to what I think the Navy did differently than the Air Force, is it put great value in the radar intercept officer or the naval flight officer, treated us as equals with our pilots, even though certainly in the F4, it was a pilot's airplane. And a lot of the training that I went through over those 6 weeks, exactly the course that Capt. Pedersen described, was very pilot focused. There were training for the radar intercept officer, but most of the training that I did was learning about how my pilot was engaging in the fight. I mean, the stick and throttle work, all of the tactics that were involved. But the thing that was common to all of us was this idea that we were to become experts in our profession, as Killer just went through very in great detail. We became experts not only in fighter aviation and air-to-air tactics, but also in the teaching and learning space. And that was common for both the pilot and the radar intercept officer. I got to lead missions at Top Gun as a backseater. I did the briefing and the debriefing. So that was an incredible experience that I didn't expect when I went there. I had about 600 hours in the F4. I went on to have about 1,000 hours in the airplane. And the people that taught us at that class were those that were, some of the plank owners of Top Gun and all the Vietnam veterans that had all that combat time. So the experience was unlike anything else I had seen in the Navy up until that point.
Thank you. Thank you, Slapshot. Killer?
Yeah, I won't add a whole lot to that because I believe Slapshot covered it. The only thing I'd like to say is that the platform, the F4 and the F14, for those who went through the syllabus in the F14, was built to have a crew too. And without eggs in my backseat and all the other ROs I flew with, including Slapshot, if it wasn't for the weapon systems and the knowledge of the weapon systems and the ability to have lots of sea stories where the mission would not have succeeded to include in Top Gun when we were the CAG leading, Eggs and I were leading the group through that evolution, would not have succeeded without the crew. That airplane needed the both of us, and we trained as a crew, and we led and flew as a crew. There might be nuances between us and crew coordination, but without the two of us there, that airplane would not have been as effective. I referred to the F4 and the F14 in this case. That's
a great answer. Thank you, sir. Do either of you have any idea about where we obtained MiGs to be the first adversary aircraft that Dan mentions in his book? And then also just kind of moving forward, how did we settle on the F5s as the primary adversary aircraft?
Well, we could probably do a whole session on just this piece, which is so fascinating. And I'm going to defer the F5 question to Killer because he's got a lot of time in that, and he can probably talk to it better than I can. But, this idea of us having MiGs, I think really was the secret sauce in what made Top Gun so successful. And by the way, that program of having MiGs here in the United States through what was then a very classified program dates all the way back to 1953 when we got a Yak-23. And the element of having that data through to Top Gun was in a program called Have Donut and Have Drill that experienced in the early, before 1970. And the first Top Gun pilots that flew in those Soviet-built MiGs actually had a special invitation for them to go up and meet the MiG-17. And not one Navy pilot beat the MiG-17 on their first attempt. Now that program eventually became known as Constant Peg, again, unclassified now, but here's a cool history story about that. So the program was convinced to create this squadron called the 4477th, which was an Air Force squadron. And Constant Peg program is named because General Vandenberg bought into the program. His call sign was Constant, and his wife's name was Peg. So that's how Constant Peg became the common program that we knew about back then. And I'll just give you my first experience. My pilot, Rory Banks, was one of the better fighter pilots that probably went through Top Gun. He has since passed away. We met a MiG-23 in an undisclosed location that was commonly known as Red Square up there in the classified area. And when we met the MiG-23, we knew it was a MiG-23. We didn't know it until the merge. We were in an F4, obviously, and we thought we were going to beat the MiG-23. And Bob McCourt, Top Gun pilot, zoom climbed that MiG-23 about 22 to 23,000 feet above us, and we lost sight, and he defeated us in about 30 seconds. And it was a life lesson for us, like many of those first Navy crews that lost to the MiG-17. So it wasn't always about winning. It was about how much you learned in the losing so that you wouldn't do that again. So anyway, I know Killer's got some good sea stories, and he can certainly talk about the adversary part in the F4 versus F5, A4.
A great intro there, Slapshot, and how we got the MiGs from different places, and also how Constant Peg and 4477 worked out. The F5, those of you who are aviators are familiar with the Venn diagram. Those of you who are not, It's a diagram that shows the operational capability of a particular platform for the different altitudes and the different airspeeds and the amount of G it can generate, the amount of turn rate it can generate. When the MiG-21 came online in Vietnam, McNamara went just as they had all along during the war and said, I want to create an airplane, Northrop, build me an airplane that has the exact same VN diagram. They built it for the South Vietnamese. And then when they matched the two VN diagrams, they put them one on top of the other, they looked exactly the same. That's incrementalism that was mentioned earlier. So the F-5 at the end of the war, several of them, matter of fact, a good number of them, were able to be brought back to the States. And they formed that cadre. And then subsequent to that, the F-5s, those are the airplanes that I flew back then. And then subsequent to that, the Swiss sold us 55 of them in the early 2000s. And much more modern aircraft. And we flew them up to Fallon in the FC-13. Down in Rains also flew them down in Yuma, and they maybe flew them on Key West. Those 55 airplanes have continued to give you a good presentation of the Cat-3 fighter. Obviously, without the radars and other things in it, it doesn't give you what you need in a Cat-4 or Cat-5, which we can talk about. So that's the F-5. It reminds me of Star Wars every time I got into it. I'm about those of you may recognize this who flew F-5s. I probably have close to 500 hours. But I think I've had 500 sorties in 400 hours. If you do the math, you recognize that airplane doesn't stay in the airplane. Back over to you, Sonny.
Thank you, sir.
Sonny, can I add one more quick thing?
Please
we didn't answer the question that you asked.
Yes, sir.
We got those MiGs now, back then, very classified program, now unclassified, principally through Israel, but we also got them from Pakistan, Indonesia, Morocco, and Egypt. We even bought some for about $250,000 a piece through the Air Force Special Program. So that's where they came from, and it's remarkable that they kept them in the air because obviously we didn't have a parts bin for those things.
Yes, sir. Thank you for clearing that up, and that's a great answer. A lot of people wanted to know. So our president, Vice Admiral Frank Pandolf, asks kind of a family of questions, but they're all related, and they're great questions. Why did the exchange ratio change so dramatically, once we got the Top Gun pilots out there? What was the single most important innovation developed and implemented by Top Gun, particularly in the early days? And then finally, given today's longer range weapons, should the focus of our training change, or has it? Any thoughts by both of you on those great questions?
Well, for me, I would say that, first of all, the three-dimensional type version of fighting that was taught at Top Gun, this gets down to the tactics, was really, really important. But the other piece, and I think this is the most important piece that I got, is Top Gun taught you to fight the airplane, not to think about the pilot or how good he might be or not be, but you had to fight the airplane. You had to assume that the airplane that you met could be fought at its absolute extreme. And Top Gun also taught us how to take the limits of whatever airplane we were flying, whether it be the F-4 or eventually the F-14 or the F-18, and go beyond just its basic limits so that you would win. And it wasn't about winning or losing. It was about ultimately winning. So I think those were the two biggest takeaways I had from Top Gun.
Yeah, and I'd like to add a piece because I think the combination of how did the Navy do it and how did the Air Force do it is an important lesson learned. In '69, they went back and said we need to start Top Gun. In '69, the Air Force said we need to go fix the airplane. And when they went to fix the airplane, they put a gun in the E, they put slats on it to be more maneuverable, they put better raw gear in it. They said that's going to fix it. This is what's going to make it work better. Navy said it's not necessarily the airplane, it's the crew. It's the understanding of the fight. It's the understanding of what it takes to win in this environment. Not in the environment they had trained for, and that was an intercept with a long-range missile BVR, but the environment where the guy's right next to you, and you've got to figure out how to beat him 1v1. Slapshot mentioned the vertical maneuvering, the ability to come out of the horizontal, the understanding of how they turn, the understanding of engine of maneuverability associated with managing your power. All those things were crucial to Top Gun and what they taught. During World War II, 40% of the kills were done by 4% of the people. That could not continue. You had to take that 4% of the people and make it 40% of the people. And it was Top Gun that allowed that occur, and it built on itself so that 40% of people had that knowledge and it built to 100% hopefully of the crews. So take the difference between the Air Force looked at it and the Navy looked at it, and take a look at how Top Gun was able to put that into experience so that by the time 72 rolled around, we were running around with between 12 and 24, as Capt. Pedersen said, but 12%, 1 to 12 kill ratio, and the Air Force was still struggling for the kill ratio that they had before.
Well, thank you very much. Your discussion and the answers to your question are really inspiring a juggernaut of questions, including from overseas. I'll get to that in a second. But the short answer is yes, Admiral Kilcline did go to Coronado High School. I think he was class of '69. And so you'll see him at the 4th of July reunion for all classes sometime in the future. This question's from Germany, and it's a dear friend of not just our foundation, but of our history and heritage command, George Schimmelfennig, and an amazing historian and great man and friend of us, as I said. But he asks from Germany, if there is one maneuver that has had a most significant influence on naval air battles in World War II, it could be the Thatch Weave. Has there been a single such idea influencing air fights over Vietnam that originated from Top Gun? So the Thatch Weave came and was given the name Thatch, and then was there anything of similar nature from Vietnam?
Killer, I'm going to defer to you on that one first.
Yeah, thanks. I think Capt. Pedersen talked about that, the loose-deuce maneuver. The understanding of an engaged fighter and a free fighter, the understanding of, as you would have found in the Thatch Weave, but in this case, using the vertical. You have to realize the threat at the time, especially the MiG-17s, but somewhat with MiG-21s, the threat at the time, the power that the F-4 had, and I'm talking F-4s here specifically, allowed it to be able to have some sanctuary at times in the vertical. So the loose-deuce maneuvering, the free fighter going in the vertical, and then re-engaging, and having that mutual support, and the section awareness, so that the individual that saw the fight, that had the best awareness, would lead. It didn't matter if your commanding officer was leading a section with a brand new ensign. Whoever had that picture was the one who led it. That was not the way it was done before, and it wasn't the way the Air Force did it. So those two things, the maneuver itself, loose-deuce maneuvering using the vertical, and the fact that inside of the section, it was not the most experienced person, it was the person who had the most SA would lead that section of the fight. So I've tried anything there.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I think George will be happy with that. This one's a specific question for you, Slapshot, although Killer, if you have an answer for it as well. But were there lessons you learned at Top Gun that you apply, not just in your career in naval aviation, but say, hey, at the University of Nebraska?
Yeah, for a lot of your listeners, they may or may not know that when I retired out of the Navy after 38 years, my last 6 years were involved in higher education, running the Naval War College, and then being the superintendent at the United States Naval Academy. And I would say that the foundational experience that I had at Top Gun, besides all the things we've already talked about and being the very best that you could be at air-to-air tactics and performing in an airplane, was really about the teaching and learning aspect. I continued to be a teacher of aviation throughout my entire career, and I was able to take that into this other element of higher education. And what I found is when I retired out of the Navy, there are places in our country that are involved in higher education that were looking for that expertise. And quite honestly, Nebraska found me and brought me to be the university president because of my background. And I highlighted my Top Gun experience and what it had done for me in my career. And now I've been the university president here with 52,000 students and 20,000 faculty and staff for a year and a half. And we've navigated through COVID-19. We've grown our enrollment. I just received the largest appropriation from the state ever in maintaining our academic buildings. So I would credit a lot of what I got at Top Gun to play out and how you lead in higher education.
Great, thank you. Killer, do you have an anecdote on this too?
Well, I'll just be really quick. Teaching and learning was what I consider to be one of the best takeaway course that I took while I was there. And I totally understand Slapshot and how you would take that in an EDU environment. But from my perspective, teaching and learning is how you can communicate and how you listen. And that's how you succeed in not only in the Navy, it's how you succeed in industry. So if you go off into industry, and as I did as a senior vice president for 6 years on a major corporation, and thousands of folks working for you and 50 offices all over the United States and around the world, you spend a lot of time trying to figure out how you're going to learn from these folks, what needs to happen, and how you're going to talk to them and communicate with them. And that's what that course is about. So fully on board, that's where I would point to.
Thank you very much. So Frank Pandolf asked the question, with longer range weapons, have of course tactics changed? And I think the answer to that was yes, they have. There's a follow-on as well. How are we prepped in the new Top Gun or in the present Top Gun on the Chinese PLAF threats? Is that where our sole focus is, or are we more ecumenical? What are your thoughts on where our emphasis lie today?
Well, I think I'd start out by saying I had the chance to see Top Gun change not only from what it was doing in that 6-week air-to-air fighter tactics course to how it evolved, as it left Miramar in 1996 and went to Fallon, where it is now today. And the program that they teach at Fallon now for Top Gun graduates is so much more expanded. There are so many more threats. There are so many more potential enemies. And let's face it, the expansion of our missions, we don't just deal in air-to-air fighter tactics. We're strike fighters. So there is a larger, much more complex environment in which to engage. And yes, as was pointed out, our need to be, nose to nose with another airplane where it's gun versus gun, missile versus missile, things that are beyond visual range, they go beyond that. In 1999, I led the VF-14 Top Hatters, and we were engaged with, laser-guided weapons under our belly to go into combat into Kosovo. And a lot of the things that we did with not having through the cloud weapons were that next level of training that we got at Top Gun. And it's hard to imagine that a backseater in an F-14 Tomcat A could lead a 40-plane strike on the first night we went into Kosovo, with B-2s coming halfway around the world from Whiteman Air Force Base that were going to follow in behind us less than 2 minutes after we left the target, which was to take out all the fuel at Pristina Airfield so that their Serbian MiGs couldn't fly anymore. But we had to be over a target, and that type of combat is now evolving away as well. We're doing things much further away. But Top Gun is still answering the call on all that. And I know Killer has experience not just from when he went there, but he's actually got family members that are part of it now too. And I think he can tell that great story.
Yeah, in fact, just to pile on and to set the stage, I think certainly those who've served with Killer know that his grandfather, his father, himself, his son, his legacy is the Navy legacy of naval aviation. His grandfather is one of the early pioneers, not in the top first 10 or so, but certainly in the top 3 digits, and had some sporty missions and some real arduous combat experiences. Killer, anything you want to share about your family legacy? And I know you're modest, but this audience is your family, and they want to know.
Well, I don't want to. Okay, I'll give you 2 answers then. I'll answer your question that was asked by Bill Pandolf, and then I'll also talk about that. My grandfather was one of the first carrier aviators. Flew in the Langley, and then flew in Saratoga. Flew in 7 different fleet X's from Coco Solo and down Panama, and on board the Saratoga, and even had one of them in Lexington. He actually died during World War II flying PBYs, which at the time in the Atlantic was pretty important in trying to take out the German submarines. Dad followed, flew whales when they carried a 10,000-pound nuke, and they were the Navy's answer to nuclear warfare from the sea. Then flew Vigilantes, an absolutely beautiful machine, which Admiral Fallon knows well. And he took that airplane out into Vietnam. And ended up retiring as a 3-star. He has retired as the commander of naval aviation in the Atlantic Fleet. I followed fighter guy, I did that, flew every version of the F-18, flew most of the versions of the F-14, and also flew several versions of the F-4. So a lot of time in fighters, in addition to a lot of adversary time. I think I counted 900 instructor hours in adversary work, which means my upper back is kind of sore sometimes. a lot of G's. My son, Hornet pilot still is. He's flying with the F-37. He's in Fallon right now, actually, going through the course, doing a lot of good work there. Was in the Strike Fighter School in Atlantic, in Switzerland, and went through Top Gun after his first tour, and is currently the training officer, getting ready to do his department tour. So these are our legacy. And what does the future look like? I think Slapshot nailed it. Top Gun in the mid 80s was starting to look at how they were going to bring the F-18 online as a strike fighter like the F-4 had been. And then the F-14 in 88 started dropping bombs, so they developed something called OST. That turned into, from the overland strike and air warfare, into Strike University up at Fallon. And these things, you started to see more and more power projection. And then obviously when the war on terror started, and OIF and OEF, we started seeing that being the primary issue. My son having dropped ordnance in Afghanistan, that's what we were looking at. I will tell you, the future is not necessarily that as much as it is trying to understand back to the air-to-air warfare against the current threat, which is China. What does air-to-air look like now with a peer? And what does a SAM capability look like, triple-digit SAMs? These are driving, or they should drive, and they will drive Top Gun's priorities. Top Gun in conjunction with VX9, NSOC, Naval Weapons Schools, different wings, and the TICOM. With Top Gun in the lead, I believe that they need to be, or at least driving this. They've got to generate air-to-air tactics. They got to do it more quickly. It's got to meet the threat that's evolving very quickly. If you look at China just 5 years ago and look at where it is today. And as important is our current fighters are run by software. And as the software comes in, a software update is a significant change to the capability of their own airplanes. And so what does the tactics look like when you get a new software build? What does the tactics look like when the Chinese bring a new aircraft on board? How does the F-35 change the way Top Gun fights and flies? So I see right now, as we're talking, Top Gun evolving again. What's it going to look like? I think it's going to look like something that's developing, like a very important piece of developing tactics for the future.
Great, thank you very much. As we're approaching running out of time, there's really two questions that I'd like to ask. The first one will be the movie. One of the reasons we settled on Top Gun, for this topicality, was that we kept, following this moving target of when the Top Gun Maverick would be released, and really we missed our mark again on this one because the movie keeps, pushing on. But there have been some questions, particularly Killer was in the first movie. You flew adversary aircraft in the '86 movie. And I know that Horst Kalk and Boomer and Jaws, Winnefeld, and others were all part of that as well. But what were some things that you admired about the movie, but also what were some things that made you cringe? And is there any comment about what you've heard about the new movie that you'd like to comment? And then finally, your last thoughts on the future, or on anything you'd like to say that I haven't asked. So let's start with you, Killer, on this one.
Okay, Top Gun. It was 1986. My skipper came to me, John Junick, said we're going to be in a movie. I was in BF 213 on board the USS Enterprise. They repainted our airplanes, repainted our helmets. It gave me a helmet that didn't fit. And I was Iceman for the movie for all the missions off of the Enterprise. So if you saw somebody landing in the beginning of the movie, taking off, saluting, guy spilling coffee on the tower, or landing after the final mission in the mid-kill, it was myself and John Junick and Pat Kilkenny. We both had the same call sign, which was interesting. He was flying on the 114 aircraft. So that was my participation in the movie. That's the entire complement of the crew came out to the carrier, used our ready room for a week to do the setups and the filming. And I've got a couple of pieces of paper signed by Tony Scott that was basically the yellow legal paper where he'd write the film stock out, some lines, and say, I want you to go do this. And Pat Kilcline and myself, we'd go out and we try to recreate it. So that was my experience. We immediately left on cruise because we were right at the end of our workups. Movie came out while we were gone, and we were in Perth, Australia, getting ready to head home when we heard the movie was in a local theater. The whole squadron went. We filled the theater, a couple hundred people, and we hooted and hollered for an hour and a half. So that was our experience. I understand, and I'm fully vested. You're not allowed to use Top Gun quotes when you're in Top Gun. I believe it's a $5 fine if you get caught doing it. There's a piece of the movie you got to make sure that it isn't a joke. That what they do is serious and it's deadly. It is kind of fun to say you were in the movie and you did that for a living, but it's not the same when you're actually flying in the missions and you're trying to make yourself your backseater if you have one and your wingman and the whole class the most combat effective they can be. So a lot of fun in the movie, not necessarily what happens at Top Gun.
Great, thank you. Slapshot, thoughts?
So I don't have any credits in the original Top Gun movie like Killer does and many of the other names that you went through, but I'm going to tell you something that many people don't know. When the movie was starting to be filmed was when I was a student at Top Gun. This was March of 1985. And the first arrival of the actors was while I was in my second week of the course. And none of the Top Gun instructors, that included Rat Willard, Jaws Winnefeld,
Sure.
all the people that you know that are in the credits, wanted to have anything to do with the movie originally. So when Tom Cruise and his handler showed up at Miramar, they tasked me and the backseater from my sister squadron, Rip Schrader, who played football at Navy. We were classmates, to go meet Tom Cruise, take him to the O Club, and get him drunk, because they were going to throw him in the pool the next day and they wanted to see what he had. So we did that. And I will tell you, I was pretty impressed with Tom Cruise. He had just come off the movie All the Right Moves. He had a ponytail. He clearly had a wrestler's body, athletic, humble. And he asked us a million questions. We were together for about 3 hours. He didn't probably drink as much beer as we did. And he did really well in the pool. But Killer knows this too, probably. He got pretty sick in the airplane the first couple of times he actually went up. And I think it was his fourth ride when he finally stopped getting sick. And that's when he fell in love with the whole thing. And of course, you know, Killer and I aren't flying anymore, but Tom Cruise apparently still is. So he's done okay. The other thing that I would share on a serious note, and I think Killer touched on this, you know, besides the awareness that the movie gave, the death of Goose is actually based on something that really happened. And I think for all of us, Fox, Fallon, all the aviators that are part of the Historical Foundation, you know, we reflect back on those that we love, that we lost in the business, because it was a dangerous business. I ended up with about 6,300 flying hours and, you know, over 2,000 carrier landings. And the only reason I was able to do that is because of the pilots that I flew with that kept me safe. And I never had to go through, you know, what happened that was based on a real life event in that movie. And I think it's a serious part that doesn't get covered by those that watch the movie. I mean, we enjoy it. It's got a lot of fun pieces to it. And I will tell you that although I can't disclose the script of the second movie, I think the next movie will have as much impact as the first one did. So it will be something to look forward to.
Well, that's so great to hear. I'll have the final word, but do you have a final word? Anything you'd like to say to the audience? We've got a smaller group today, but people will watch this on YouTube, and it'll really grow. And so this is an impactful session. So anything you'd like to say just to the future? Killer.
I'll start and I'll let Killer finish, but Top Gun changed my life. And I feel blessed and fortunate to have gone through it in 1985. It shaped my career, and it really helps define who I am today as a leader in higher education. So There is not enough credit that's given to those that were the plank owners that founded it, developed it for a specific reason to change a kill ratio in Vietnam, but it's done so much more and it continues to do so today.
Thank you. Killer?
Yeah, thanks. And first of all, I'd like to thank Slapshot for what he's set up to this point and all the things that he has done. He's one of the bravest men I know. First of all, he flew in my back seat, 2,000 traps and Tomcats, or in fighters. God bless you. And the other thing he mentioned, losing people. I lost my brother flying in Tomcat.
Sure did.
At sea. And so just from a family perspective, when you have as many naval aviators or warriors as we had in our family, that happens. But it is truly, Goose was a very touching part of that movie for me too. My final word was kind of the word I said at the beginning. I'm a fan of Top Gun. I remain a fan of Top Gun. I've talked to my son about what he sees, what the expectations are, the drive for excellence and the culture of excellence. That's what remains, and that's what will carry Top Gun and naval aviation, very specifically, through the future and to match and beat. So that's my final word. Thank you, Sonny, for allowing me to be here.
No, thank you both. And you know, as Air Boss, Killer, it was never better on the waterfront in Pacific and Atlantic. Your aircraft maintenance protocols were superb. Your readiness was superb. Your carrier air wing training were superb, and everything you did was magnificent. And our Navy owes you a debt of gratitude. And for you, Slapshot, you took this warfighting competence to the War College, to the Naval Academy, where you imparted it on the Brigade of Midshipmen, and now you do the same thing with the University of Nebraska. And both your work is brilliant. Your legacies will last for decades, and we very much appreciate your presence today. Admiral Fallon still on board, sir. Do you want to have the last word? I don't know if did you hear me, sir?
Yeah, I got you. How can I top that? I thought it was just phenomenal, fantastic. Thousands ought to be watching this instead of what we have. But hopefully we can get this thing out, get some more people to see it in the future. But Jens, you did a terrific job. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm going to call an end to the annual meeting. I'm so proud of what we did, and I want to thank Dr. Dave Winkler, Captain Pedersen, and our panelists, and of course our chairman and president, Fox Fallon and Frank Pandolf. We're going to sign off. Thank you for being here with us. It's been a long morning, but it's been a very productive morning. And if you're not a member of our foundation, join. We'd love to have you out here. Thank you so much.